The hum of the courthouse ventilation system felt like a low, mechanical growl, vibrating through the heavy oak panels of the King County family courtroom. Outside the high, arched windows, the slate-gray Seattle sky wept a persistent, freezing rain that blurred the distant outline of the Bellevue skyline. Inside the room, the atmosphere was thick with the suffocating precision of an expensive legal execution. I sat perfectly still at the left side of the polished mahogany defense table, my hands clasped loosely over my lap, my posture entirely anchored in a quiet, unyielding serenity. Across the short, carpeted aisle sat my husband, Marcus Foster, a man whose very existence was a highly polished exercise in narcissistic theater and unearned arrogance. Marcus wore a custom-tailored, navy blue Italian suit, his hair immaculately styled, a smug, predatory smile playing across his lips as he leaned back in his high-backed leather chair. Beside him sat his primary weapon of choice, Mr. Sterling, a senior corporate litigation attorney whose reputation for financial savagery was legendary among the city's wealthy elite. For the past 2 hours, Sterling had commanded the courtroom podium, his voice carrying a smooth, synthetic resonance that filled the high-ceilinged room with a series of absolute demands. They were systematically stripping my life down to bare concrete, presenting a stack of heavily altered asset schedules designed to leave me completely penniless. Your Honor, the reality of this marital estate is entirely straightforward, Mr. Sterling announced, his gold cufflinks gleaming brightly under the fluorescent courtroom lights. My client, Marcus Foster, is the sole visionary, the primary architect, and the exclusive driving force behind the Foster Development Group empire. The multi-million-dollar waterfront mansion in Bellevue, the collection of imported luxury sports cars, and the expansive commercial real estate portfolios were built entirely on his personal corporate credit and executive vision. The respondent, Rachel, has operated merely as a traditional housewife for the past 7 years, contributing zero liquid capital and zero operational value to the corporate structures. We are formally demanding that this court award 100% ownership of the Bellevue estate, the entire fleet of luxury vehicles, and all sovereign corporate equity to my client. We are offering the respondent a minor, one-time transitional lump sum of $15,000 on the absolute condition that she waives all future claims to spousal maintenance and leaves the properties by Friday afternoon. Marcus took a slow, deliberate sip from his crystal water glass, tossing a quick, patronizing glance over his shoulder toward the public gallery seats where his friends had gathered to witness his grand victory. He leaned slightly across his table, his voice a low, mocking whisper that carried clearly across the quiet space between us. "You should have taken the initial settlement I offered you months ago, Rachel," Marcus murmured, his eyes crinkling with a terrifying, self-satisfied amusement. "You always were a simple, small-minded junior accountant, and you honestly believed your little spreadsheets could match the reach of my legal team. I built this empire, I own the city, and by the time we sign these final decrees, you and Tyler will be living in a cramped 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of the valley." I didn't answer his malice. I didn't let a single flicker of human emotion breach the calm, stoic mask of my face, and I didn't reach for my handkerchief to weep over the systematic destruction of my life. Instead, a freezing, dangerous tactical peace settled deep into the center of my chest, the cold calculation of a former master auditor taking complete monopoly over my mind. Marcus truly believed that because I had spent the last 7 years quietly managing our household, folding his designer shirts, and driving our son Tyler to soccer practices, I had forgotten how to count. He believed his loud gaslighting, his expensive corporate dinners, and his calculated displays of high society prestige had completely blinded me to the actual machinery of his business. He had absolutely no idea that his unyielding arrogance was the exact psychological blind spot I had spent the last 8 months masterfully exploiting to prepare his absolute financial execution. To understand how a marriage built on a foundation of shared youthful dreams could dissolve into a cold, white-collar war zone, you have to understand the true history of Foster Development Group. When Marcus and I met 10 years ago, He was nothing more than a charismatic, smooth-talking, independent contractor with a mountain of personal debt and a trunk full of basic construction tools. I was a brilliant, highly analytical junior accountant at a prominent corporate compliance firm, a woman whose eye for forensic data tracking and tax structure architecture had earned early praise from the senior partners. When Marcus begged me to leave my secure position to help him launch his own independent real estate syndication firm, I poured my entire soul, my private savings, and my professional intellect into his dream. I established our primary corporate books, structured our early tax shields, and managed our frontline credit profiles with a hawkish, mathematical precision that made our early bank loans possible. But as the real estate market surged and the multi-million-dollar commercial contracts began pouring into our Bellevue offices, the man I loved began to systematically mutate. The wealth didn't just change his lifestyle, it completely warped his psychology, unleashing an insatiable, narcissistic monster who required absolute, constant validation. Marcus began to rewrite our history, convincing himself that his innate, masculine brilliance was the sole, exclusive reason for our unprecedented corporate success. He systematically pushed me out of the primary corporate offices, framing my strict financial compliance and risk mitigation strategies as a boring, small-minded attempt to control his destiny. You need to stay at home and focus on being a proper mother for Tyler, Rachel, Marcus had roared at me 3 years ago, violently slamming his heavy gold watch onto our marble kitchen island. You've always had the narrow, timid mindset of a low-level cubicle bean counter, and your constant obsession with auditing our investor lines is holding my vision back. I am the face of Foster Development Group. I am the one taking the massive executive risks, and I won't let your anxious paranoia ruin the destiny I am building for this family. I swallowed my pride for the sake of our young son, retreating into our Bellevue mansion and allowing Marcus to assume absolute command of the primary corporate bank tokens. But my training as a forensic auditor made it physically impossible for me to simply close my eyes and ignore the subtle, jagged cracks that began appearing in our family's financial sheets. 16 months ago, I noticed a series of highly irregular, massive wire transfers siphoned from our primary commercial development escrow lines into a private offshore corporate account. Simultaneously, Marcus's hyper-attentive marital behavior cooled into a chilling, distant arrogance, marked by mysterious weekend investor conferences in Aspen and late-night corporate planning sessions downtown. The true, sickening depth of his betrayal laid itself bare on a rainy Tuesday evening when I opened our synchronized family cloud server to archive our monthly medical insurance updates. There, nestled beneath a hidden subdirectory masked as a basic property utility log, lay an extensive cache of private, high-resolution photographs and encrypted text transcripts. Marcus was operating a secret, parallel lifestyle, renting a luxury penthouse downtown for a 24-year-old high society influencer named Vanessa. The text messages were a grotesque exercise in unadulterated narcissistic depravity, with Marcus openly mocking my plain appearance and promising Vanessa that he was actively drafting a legal strategy to dump me. "Don't worry, my sweet girl," one of Marcus's messages to Vanessa read, the text glowing with a chilling clarity under the dark room light. "My wife is a completely submissive, mathematically inept house mouse who doesn't have the brains to check the primary corporate capital lines. I am systematically shifting our liquid equity out of her name, and by the time I hand her the divorce papers, she won't even have the capital to retain a basic neighborhood attorney to challenge our assets. We will have the Bellevue mansion, the sports cars, and the entire corporate empire all to ourselves, and she'll be left surviving on state assistance in a tiny apartment." I sat alone at our kitchen table until the sun began to break through the gray Seattle mist, the profound, agonizing heartbreak in my chest slowly freezing into an unbreakable, dangerous tactical focus. He wanted a quiet, submissive house mouse who lacked the intellect to challenge his corporate empire, and I was going to give him that exact performance for the next 8 months. I didn't confront him with the photographs, I didn't pack his bags in a fit of useless emotional rage, and I didn't give him a single second of visual warning that his secret world had been fully exposed. Instead, I quietly reached into my private professional network, retaining the exclusive, off-the-grid services of an elite team of forensic accounting veterans and white-collar defense attorneys. While Marcus spent his days preening in front of his local real estate boards and spending thousands on designer bracelets for Vanessa, my team launched a subterranean digital audit of Foster Development Group. What my forensic specialists uncovered beneath the glossy, multi-million-dollar surface of his real estate empire was a corporate scandal so severe it read like a major federal indictment. Marcus's brilliant executive vision was an absolute mathematical illusion. Foster Development Group was facing a total, imminent structural collapse. To fund his extravagant private lifestyle, his luxury sports cars, and Vanessa's insatiable desire for high-end designer apparel, Marcus had been systematically siphoning the development capitals. When several major commercial condominium projects in downtown Seattle stalled due to supply chain failures and his own operational incompetence, he didn't notify the primary investors. Instead, Marcus had executed a dangerous, highly illegal financial rollover scheme, utilizing the liquid capital deposits of brand-new real estate investors to pay off the high-interest dividends of old syndicates. It was a textbook, multi-million-dollar illegal Ponzi scheme masked as a legitimate commercial development enterprise. He was actively falsifying occupancy certificates, forging construction progress summaries, and shuffling millions of dollars across a web of dummy corporate shell companies just to stay one step ahead of federal regulators. The ledgers revealed that the entire Foster Development Group was currently drowning under a massive, silent tidal wave of unpayable commercial liabilities and imminent federal fraud lawsuits. If I filed for a standard divorce and attempted to demand my rightful 50% share of the corporate assets, I would legally bind myself to his criminal enterprise, rendering me equally liable for the multi-million-dollar corporate debts and the pending regulatory disasters. I needed a masterful, asymmetrical legal sting operation that would allow Marcus to willingly strip me of the hollow corporate empire while transferring the absolute entirety of the criminal and financial liabilities onto his own shoulders. I spent 4 months working alongside my forensic legal team, carefully constructing a pristine financial trap disguised as an act of absolute, submissive surrender. We discovered a specific, historical corporate resolution clause within the foundational bylaws of Foster Development Group that allowed a departing spouse to execute a total, unconditional transfer of equity in exchange for a complete release from all personal indemnification. Furthermore, using my remaining auxiliary access token as a registered co-director of the Family Residential Property Trust, I quietly executed a massive, secret $400,000 second mortgage balloon payment structure on the Bellevue mansion. The specialized loan was structured through an aggressive, private high-yield institutional credit firm that deal exclusively with high-net-worth real estate assets. The critical, lethal clause within the balloon mortgage document stated that the absolute entirety of the $400,000 liability would become instantly due and payable in full if the primary title deed of the mansion underwent a total change of ownership to a single individual. I left the $400,000 cash reserve sitting untouched within a secure, cloud-backed corporate escrow account that required my unique biometric signature to ever release. Marcus and his high-priced attorney, Mr. Sterling, looked at my complete lack of aggressive courtroom defense during the initial separation hearings as absolute proof that their psychological warfare had broken my spirit. They truly believed that I was simply a terrified, submissive mother who was willing to accept their insulting $15,000 settlement just to avoid a long, agonizing public trial. They had absolutely no idea that every single property request they were fiercely demanding at the podium was a loaded, explosive financial asset that was about to detonate within their own hands. Judge Evelyn Rowe turned her gaze back toward my side of the table, her wooden gavel resting loosely in her hand as the silence in the courtroom stretched to a tense, historical peak. "Miss Foster, I am asking you one final time on the record," Judge Rowe stated, her voice carrying a deep, clinical seriousness. "Do you accept the final property distribution schedules presented by the petitioner's counsel, or do you wish to move this matter into an extended, formal trial phase to challenge the corporate equity valuations?" I stood up slowly from my chair, my movements calm, deliberate, and entirely graceful as I adjusted the collar of my simple wool blazer. I looked directly into the eyes of my husband, Marcus, watching the smug, triumphant sneer widen across his features as he leaned forward, fully expecting to watch me weep over my total defeat. Your Honor, the respondent completely accepts the property distribution schedules exactly as they have been presented by Mr. Sterling this morning, I announced, my voice smooth, quiet, and carrying an unyielding clarity that echoed through the silent room. I am entirely willing to sign over the absolute 100% ownership of the Bellevue waterfront mansion, the entire fleet of luxury sports cars, and all sovereign equity within the Foster Development Group to my husband effective immediately. I only request that the court accept the attached corporate equity transfer addendum under Section 9, which fully releases me from any personal management status within the firm, granting Marcus the total, unconditional control he has always demanded. Marcus let out a short, triumphant laugh, violently slapping his hand against his leg as he turned to his attorney with an expression of pure, unadulterated narcissistic victory. I told you she would cave, Sterling. Marcus whispered loudly, his chest puffing out with a grotesque pride. The house mouse knows when she's completely outmatched. Let's sign the paperwork and get this garbage over with. Mr. Sterling offered a smug, patronizing nod, hurriedly pulling the thick, leather-bound final divorce decrees from his briefcase and sliding them across the central aisle to my table with a sharp, echoing flick. We are highly satisfied with the respondent's sudden display of realism, Your Honor, Mr. Sterling preened, adjusting his glasses with an air of absolute corporate dominance. We accept the Section 9 addendum automatically, as my client has always been the sole managing director of the firm anyway. Let the record show that the property transfers are fully finalized. I reached down to my leather portfolio, pulled out my high-end fountain pen, and executed my legal signature across the final transfer pages with a swift, steady flourish that carried absolutely zero emotional hesitation. Marcus snatched the documents back from my table, his hands shaking with a blinding greed as he scrawled his own name across the primary title pages, fully believing he had just successfully executed the greatest property heist of his career. He proudly held the signed decrees up to the light, a smug, venomous grin playing on his lips as he looked down at me from the podium. It's officially over, Rachel, Marcus sneered, his tone dripping with a chilling, unchecked arrogance. The Bellevue mansion is mine, the company is mine, and you have exactly 48 hours to pack your little bags and get out of my sight. At that precise, cinematic second, my attorney, Sarah Chin, stood up from our table, her face an absolute mask of pure, unyielding clinical ice as she pushed a secondary, heavy white compliance folder across the space. Mr. Sterling, before you congratulate your client on his magnificent acquisition, I suggest you execute an immediate, thorough review of the attached financial liability schedules under the Section 9 addendum. Sarah Chin stated with a razor-sharp precision. The high-priced attorney frowned, a slight, nervous twitch forming along his jawline as he lazily flipped open the white folder, expecting to find a standard set of household utility transfers or basic insurance disclosures. But as his eyes scanned the first 3 pages of the forensic compliance reports, the arrogant, smug expression on Mr. Sterling's face instantly violently shattered into a mask of pure, unadulterated psychological horror. The color drained from his skin so rapidly he looked as though he had been struck by a physical bolt of lightning, his hands violently trembling as the heavy papers began to rustle loudly in the silent room. He stared at the documents, his breath becoming shallow and ragged, a thick bead of cold sweat forming along his forehead as he frantically read the legal definitions of the asset transfers. What the hell is this, Rachel? Mr. Sterling stammered, his polished, synthetic voice dropping into a weak, unstable pitch that sent an immediate shockwave of pure panic across his table. Marcus, what did you sign? What is the meaning of these corporate debt resolutions? Marcus's smile froze instantly on his lips, his head snapping toward his attorney with a sharp, aggressive confusion. What are you talking about, Sterling? I just took 100% of the company. We won. You didn't win anything, you idiot. Mr. Sterling roared, completely losing his professional composure as he violently slammed the compliance folder onto the mahogany wood, his gaze ripping into his client with a terrifying anger. By demanding 100% ownership and sole sovereign executive control of Foster Development Group under this specific Section 9 addendum, you have legally, unconditionally absorbed all multi-million-dollar corporate liabilities and pending fraud lawsuits. Rachel has officially been stripped of all management status, which means she is legally completely insulated from the firm's debts. She isn't liable for a single cent of the commercial defaults. And that's not the worst part, Marcus. Look at the residential trust logs. While you were away on your vacations, Rachel executed a secret $400,000 second mortgage balloon payment structure on the Bellevue waterfront mansion. The loan clause states that the absolute entirety of the $400,000 debt becomes instantly due and payable in full the exact second the primary title deed undergoes a total change of ownership to a single individual. By forcing her off the deed this morning, you have personally activated the balloon payment clause. You owe the private credit firm $400,000 in cash by 5 o'clock this afternoon, or the mansion enters an immediate, total foreclosure sequence. Marcus bolted upright from his leather chair, his eyes bulging with a sudden, suffocating panic as his mind frantically struggled to process the total, catastrophic collapse of his unearned reality. He snatched the compliance files from his attorney's hands, his gaze dancing across the forensic spreadsheets that my team had compiled with such masterfully timed precision. The documents displayed the certified federal fraud indictments that were currently being finalized by the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding his illegal Ponzi scheme. It mapped the exact transactional trails proving that Foster Development Group was facing over $4 million in imminent commercial defaults and investor lawsuits that would land on his desk by Monday morning. Rachel, you bitch, you set me up. Marcus screamed across the courtroom, his face contorted into a mask of pure, psychotic rage as he tried to lunge across the central aisle toward my table. You knew the development projects were failing. You knew the bank lines were defaulting. You can't leave me with these debts. This contract is completely fraudulent. Judge Evelyn Rowe didn't offer him a single second of sympathy or debate. Her heavy wooden gavel came down with a definitive, ringing thunderclap that echoed through the room like an executioner's axe. Sit down, Mr. Foster, or I will have the bailiffs place you in immediate custody for contempt. Judge Rowe roared, her expression carrying a freezing, absolute severity that silenced his cries completely. The property transfers were executed under your own explicit, aggressive demands, and your signature has been officially recorded with the state notary seals. This court officially recognizes the total, unconditional validity of the divorce decree, and the Section 9 liability protections stand as an ironclad firewall. This matter is adjourned. I stood up from my defense table, my posture completely upright, my expression carrying a beautiful, serene peace that radiated the true victory of my intelligence. I zipped my leather portfolio shut, offered a polite, professional nod to the judge, and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom without a single beat of hesitation, regret, or emotional weight. As I pushed past the heavy mahogany double doors into the bright lights of the courthouse hallway, the frantic, terrified screams of my husband and his high-priced attorney faded into the background like harmless static electricity. The house of cards they had built on a foundation of unearned privilege, severe gaslighting, and corporate deception had completely dissolved into pure ash, leaving behind the clean, magnificent reality of my own self-worth. The chronological, satisfying implosion of Marcus Foster's lifestyle descended upon his existence over the subsequent 6 months with the unstoppable, crushing velocity of a natural law. He didn't possess a single fraction of the $400,000 in liquid cash required to satisfy the immediate balloon payment mortgage on the Bellevue mansion by the 5 o'clock deadline. The private high-yield credit firm moved with a terrifying commercial speed, initiating an immediate, total foreclosure sequence on the property before the weekend could even close. Within less than 21 days, a team of uniformed county sheriffs arrived at the grand iron gates of the Bellevue estate, executing an official eviction notice and padlocking the front double doors with heavy steel chains. Marcus was forced to stand on the manicured driveway in the freezing rain, throwing his expensive designer suits and luxury personal items into cardboard boxes while the neighbors watched in absolute fascination. But the economic collapse didn't stop at the loss of his residential sanctuary. It extended directly into the heart of his automotive vanity. On a bright Thursday afternoon, a pair of commercial flatbed tow trucks pulled up to the curb outside his temporary office building downtown. The recovery agents executed immediate repossession orders on his pristine sports cars and his matte black, customized luxury SUV, because Marcus had defaulted on the high-interest commercial leases he used to project an image of wealth. His wealthy high-society business colleagues and country club peers completely blacklisted his name from their networks within minutes of the news leaking into the local real estate journals. They tore up their joint venture proposals and canceled their capital injections, desperate to distance their personal brands from the toxic stench of a man who was facing active white-collar fraud investigations. The ultimate layer of human karma, however, struck his private life with a spectacular, chilling precision that completely hollowed out his remaining pride. His mistress, Vanessa, the high-society influencer who had spent months whispering toxic poison into his ear and plotting to occupy my Bellevue mansion, vanished from his life the absolute second his fraudulent wealth disappeared. The moment she discovered that the primary corporate bank accounts were frozen by the state auditors, and that Marcus was drowning under a multi-million-dollar wave of liabilities, her love died an instant death. She quietly packed her designer bags, changed her personal smartphone numbers, and fled the state with a wealthy new real estate investor from California, leaving Marcus to face the federal prosecutors in absolute isolation. By the turn of the fiscal quarter, Foster Development Group officially collapsed into a definitive corporate bankruptcy liquidation, its commercial equipment sold at a public auction to pay back the victims of his Ponzi scheme. Marcus was forced to move out of his luxury downtown circles entirely, renting a tiny, drafty studio apartment on the industrial outskirts of the valley where the heavy freight trains shook the thin walls at all hours of the night. He spent his days sitting at a cluttered kitchen table, buried under an unyielding mountain of federal legal summonses and civil damages lawsuits that would consume the remainder of his natural youth. The pacing of my life slowed down beautifully over the subsequent 2 years, allowing the frantic trauma of my past marriage to transition into a continuous current of pure serenity and absolute personal triumph. I used the $400,000 cash reserve that my team had successfully protected within the secure escrow repository to build a beautiful, honest, and completely independent destiny for myself and my son. We relocated to a stunning, sun-filled historic home located on a quiet, tree-lined street in a peaceful new coastal community far away from the toxic, superficial circles of Bellevue. Our new home featured massive glass windows that looked out over a quiet garden filled with ancient maple trees, fresh wild lavender, and the soft, comforting current of the ocean wind. The rooms inside our sanctuary were filled with the soft, melodic hum of a jazz vinyl record, the rich aroma of fresh espresso, and the absolute, unshakable safety of a life where our boundaries would never be violated again. I launched my own independent boutique financial consultation firm, utilizing my elite forensic accounting talents to help vulnerable women and independent business owners protect their assets from white-collar predators. My firm flourished on the international stage, built entirely on a foundation of pure merit, absolute data compliance, and genuine professional integrity. Tyler thrived within his new local school, his laughter echoing happily through our sun-filled backyard every single afternoon as he played with our rescue dog under the shade of the maples. The final, emotionally resonant closure of my journey arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon when my legal intermediary forwarded a long-distance voicemail transcript to my system console. I sat on the plush velvet sofa of my beautiful living room, my son sleeping peacefully upstairs, a cup of hot chamomile tea resting in my hand as I forced my eyes to scan the text logs. It was a frantic, weeping message from Marcus, his voice completely stripped of the booming, arrogant authority he used to terrorize our household with during his corporate prime. "Rachel, please. I am begging you on my knees to call the state prosecutor's office," the transcription read, his words shaking with a primitive, desperate panic. The federal regulators have finalized the grand jury indictments, and my defense lawyers are telling me that I am facing a mandatory 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for the Ponzi scheme. I lost the mansion, the sports cars are gone, Vanessa completely abandoned me in the dirt, and I have to work a low-wage manual data entry job just to afford my weekly grocery balances. Every single night, the trains shake the walls of this tiny apartment, and I think about how hard you worked to establish our early credit lines while I was treating you like an assistant. You have plenty of liquid capital from your new compliance firm, Rachel. You have everything. Please wire me a small fraction of the escrow reserves just to help me retain a decent defense counsel. We were a family for 7 years. I stared at the words on the screen for a long moment, looking at the pathetic, broken remains of the monster who had happily plotted to leave his own wife and child homeless for the sake of his vanity. I didn't feel a single flash of malicious joy, and I didn't waste a single second writing a long, defensive paragraph trying to make a narcissist understand the magnitude of his own cruelty. True liberation means reaching a psychological place where the burning panic of your abusers carries exactly 0 weight over your self-worth. His sudden, frantic appeals to family loyalty weren't born out of a genuine realization of the emotional manipulation he had inflicted upon my soul. They were born out of a desperate terror over the permanent loss of his walking safety net. He didn't miss his wife. He missed the quiet compliance and the defenseless target that had allowed him to commit white-collar crimes without ever facing a human consequence. I deleted the file from my system with a single, gentle tap of my finger, letting his words dissolve forever into the digital void, leaving my beautiful, sun-filled living room in absolute, permanent serenity. The absolute destruction of his lifestyle hadn't been caused by my cold revenge. It was simply the natural, mathematical harvest of the bitter, greedy seeds he had planted over a lifetime of cruelty. He had tried to steal my future to protect his unearned control, and he was finally being forced to live in the silent, empty desert of his own creation. I walked over to the large glass windows of my bedroom, watching the autumn leaves dance in the cool coastal wind under a beautiful, clear sky, a profound sense of total victory settling deep into my heart. I had turned the coldest marriage deception into a flawless masterpiece of pure self-worth, completely owning my life and my son's future on my own terms. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the partner, the child, or the dedicated worker whose silence and hard work have been systematically weaponized by the parasites in your life, hear me clearly. Your value is never defined by the absolute blindness or the predatory greed of a toxic household dynamic that refuses to see your true worth. Strength does not mean enduring financial fraud, emotional neglect, or psychological gaslighting for the sake of an artificial marriage piece that only serves the thieves in your world. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for currency, and you begin to use your own brilliant mind to establish unbreakable walls around your future. My corporate divorce trap was a beautiful achievement, a complete deployment of forensic strategy that permanently shielded my family from the hands of criminals. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to look into the mirror every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic structure defined by a shared surname, a marriage contract, or the toxic obligation to sacrifice your youth for people who treat your existence like a convenience. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your hard work is genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.